And the Oscar goes to Casey Affleck, Manchester by the Sea.
Lee had jokingly remarked to his daughter that if he hadn't had the three of them, he could have watched games freely and lived a carefree life. Unexpectedly, his words seemed to come true. That night, a fire reduced their home to ashes, and his three young children perished in the flames, their bodies charred. The tragedy left him utterly devastated, as if his heart had been slashed with a knife, robbing him of any will to live. After a police investigation, it was determined that the fire was indeed related to him. It started because he forgot to put the fire guard back on the fireplace. Lee was filled with guilt and wanted to be judged, but the police did not punish him.
Look, Lee, you made a horrible mistake, like a million other people did last night. Not a crime to forget to put the screen on the fireplace.
Lee walked out of the interrogation room stiffly. No one noticed anything unusual about him, but in the next moment, he suddenly grabbed the gun from the policeman's waist. Fortunately, his desperation for death made him forget to release the safety. The officers at the scene were horrified and quickly subdued him. Lee's body survived, but his soul remained forever trapped in that fire. From that day on, his wife Randi filed for divorce, and Lee fell into a deep depression. He left his hometown and moved to Boston, where he worked odd repair jobs, changing light bulbs, fixing pipes, and repairing toilets. He quietly completed his tasks in different homes, neither slacking off nor showing any enthusiasm. When customers insulted or complained about him, he simply gave up. His boss told him there were numerous complaints, but he didn't care. At the bar, he was indifferent to women's advances. However, if someone across the room laughed and glanced at him a few times, he would suddenly lose control and start a fight, convinced they were mocking him. He rented a dark basement room where he could only see the snow falling through a narrow window. He had escaped the death penalty, but now he chose to confine himself to a living one. One day, his brother visited with his nephew and remarked that Lee's place, without any furniture, didn't look like a home.
Let's go get some furniture.
Get off my back.
Lee angrily drove them away, but his brother still bought him some furniture. Years later, fate played another cruel joke on him. One day, while clearing snow, he received a phone call with devastating news about his brother. Lee rushed back to his hometown in Manchester, but by the time he arrived at the hospital, his brother had already passed away. He had suffered from heart muscle failure, a condition that had been diagnosed years earlier, with doctors warning he only had 5 to 10 years left. Lee hadn't expected this day to come so quickly. His brother lay there, pale and cold. Lee tried to press his face against him to feel some warmth. He kissed his brother's cheek, and for the first time in years, a flicker of grief appeared on his numb face. All of his brother's final arrangements fell on Lee, who had no experience handling such matters and didn't know where to start. The first person he thought of was his brother's son, 16-year-old Patrick. Lee drove to Patrick's school, recalling the carefree jokes he used to make with his young nephew on the boat. In those memories, Manchester had white houses, a beautiful wife, 2 adorable daughters, and a baby son lying in a crib. Back then, Lee had a warm sense of humor, comforting arms, and a harmonious family. Now he was alone, quietly driving through the cold streets of Manchester. Lee found Patrick at the hockey rink. The moment Patrick saw him, he lost control, punching a teammate to the ground. He realized that Lee's arrival meant something had happened to his father. The sudden, devastating news left the young Patrick overwhelmed. He glanced at his father's body but turned and left without a word, as if his father's passing had no impact on his life. Not long after, Lee took Patrick to see a lawyer to discuss his brother's will. While Patrick sat near the door playing on his phone, Lee was stunned by the will's contents. His brother had appointed him as Patrick's guardian. Lee was overwhelmed by disbelief. How could this be? He couldn't do it. He didn't even want to. Did his brother forget about that terrible night all those years ago? It was another cold winter night, and Lee vividly remembered it. He had been having a great time with friends at home, playing until 2 a.m. while his 3 children slept upstairs. His wife, Randi, was furious and came downstairs in anger, demanding they stop. The friends eventually left in frustration, but Lee wasn't sobered up yet. When the beer ran out, he decided to head out and buy more. By the time he returned, he was met with a blazing inferno and his wife's heart-wrenching cries. The rescue team managed to save his wife, but their 3 children perished in the fire. Lee couldn't bring himself to accept the responsibility of becoming Patrick's guardian. However, with his brother gone and Patrick's mother nowhere to be found, The boy would end up in an orphanage if Lee refused. Left with no choice, Lee reluctantly took on the responsibility of caring for his nephew. He brought Patrick to inspect the fishing boat his brother had left behind. The boat's engine was outdated, and repairing it would cost a significant amount. Lee wanted to sell the boat and take Patrick to Boston, but Patrick was adamantly opposed to the idea. The small boat carried too many cherished memories of the three of them. One day, Patrick's long-absent mother unexpectedly called, offering to take custody of him. Lee was reluctant to agree, knowing that Patrick's mother was a habitual drunk who had abandoned her family when Patrick's father fell ill. Patrick, however, believed she had turned over a new leaf. Patrick visited his mother's new home to test the waters. Her current husband appeared to be a devout and kind man. However, after Patrick left, he received a polite email from his stepfather, reminding him not to intrude on their lives without notice and asking him to schedule visits in advance. This insincerity left Patrick deeply disheartened. Lee organized a simple funeral for his brother, with Patrick standing at the door to greet the guests. Lee stood nearby, occasionally glancing toward the entrance with a hint of unease. His ex-wife had called earlier saying she wanted to attend the funeral. Sure enough, she came, but after 10 years apart, she wasn't alone. Beside her stood another man. Lee was at a loss. When he saw her pregnant belly and the happiness etched across her face, he felt as though his soul had left his body. His expression was vacant as he numbly hugged her. Even as the funeral drew to a close, he stood frozen, unable to pull himself together. His ex-wife had moved on, building a new family and leaving the shadows of the past behind, while Lee remained trapped in his grief, unable to reconcile with the changing world around him. The funeral finally ended, but the mortuary informed them that because it was winter, the ground was too frozen for burial. His brother's body would have to remain in cold storage until spring. Patrick was unhappy about the delay but could do nothing. Haunted by painful memories, Lee felt he couldn't stay in his hometown any longer and was desperate to leave. Once again, he proposed moving to Boston with Patrick, but Patrick firmly refused.
All my friends are here. I got 2 girlfriends. You're a janitor in Quincy. What the hell do you care where you live?
Lee realized he couldn't selfishly force Patrick to compromise for his own pain. Ultimately, he decided to stay. He returned alone to pack his belongings. Most things were carelessly thrown into boxes, but he carefully wrapped the photos of his 3 children. He then moved into his brother's room with his luggage. Meanwhile, Patrick was dealing with a mishap downstairs. A frozen chicken had fallen out of the fridge, and no matter how many times he tried to close it, the door wouldn't shut. Suddenly, he broke down into uncontrollable sobs. Lee hurried downstairs to check on him.
Can you get that shit out of here, please?
Patrick finally admitted that seeing the frozen meat reminded him of his father lying in the cold storage. It turned out he wasn't indifferent to his father's death. He was simply burying his sorrow deep within. His calm demeanor was nothing more than a mask for his grief. This was the darkest moment of Patrick's life, and Lee wanted to help him through it. He realized Patrick needed something to hold on to, so he decided to repair the fishing boat. To save money for the repairs, Lee had to find a job. However, despite searching the entire town, no one was willing to hire him. Even after all these years, people still saw him as the fool responsible for the fire. Lee suggested selling his brother's prized hunting rifle to buy a new motor for the boat. Patrick agreed, and the two gave the boat a complete makeover. Patrick was overjoyed and even invited one of his girlfriends for a trip out to sea. Watching the young couple laugh and play on the boat, Lee's face lit up with a rare smile. For a moment, he was reminded that life could still hold some beauty. Wanting to give the pair some privacy, he went for a walk only to run into his ex-wife. She had already given birth to her son, and while Lee congratulated her outwardly, his emotions churned inside. He wanted to leave quickly, but his ex-wife insisted on talking.
I said a lot of terrible things to you.
No.
My heart was broken. But I know yours is broken too.
She urged him to stop wallowing in despair and move on with his life.
Randy, no.
I'm just sorry.
I can't.
Though Lee downplayed her concerns, only he knew how impossible it was to let go of his burdens. Later, he returned to the bar, drank himself into a stupor, and, as always, picked a fight. Bruised and battered, he was dragged home. For Lee, this pain was a temporary escape from his past, a physical reminder that he was still alive. Back home, he collapsed on the couch and fell into a deep sleep. In his dreams, he saw his 2 daughters staring at him with wide eyes, as if silently judging him for his past sins. Lee woke up in a panic to find his house filled with smoke. Rushing to the kitchen, he tossed a burnt pan into the sink and leaned weakly against the counter. Lee realized he couldn't win against the city that had destroyed him or the grief that haunted him. He made a final decision. He would arrange for Patrick to stay with a trusted friend and then leave for Boston to continue working as a handyman. Patrick was upset and asked why he had to leave their hometown.
I can't beat it. I can't beat it. I'm sorry.
Lee knew he could never reconcile with himself or forgive his own mistakes. He believed that the only way to honor his lost children was to live in perpetual pain. When Patrick found the photos of Lee's 3 children in his room, he finally understood his uncle's struggles. The following spring, Lee's brother was finally laid to rest. Lee's ex-wife attended the funeral, but his brother's ex-wife did not. Throughout the ceremony, neither Lee nor Patrick shed a tear, though Lee's ex-wife's child cried uncontrollably. After the funeral, Lee and Patrick took the boat out to sea. They sat at the stern fishing together. Patrick busily worked his rod while Lee sat motionless, holding his rod without a care. It seemed as though no fish could ever stir his passion again. This is a powerful and deeply moving film, but it's one I can't bear to watch a second time. People often tell you to forget the past and look forward to live a better life. But when a heart is broken, it's truly shattered. Some stories offer no redemption, no solace, and that sense of regret is, perhaps, an unavoidable part of life. That's all for today's recap. See you in the next one.